today I have a special guest who embodies all the three things which I talk in the podcast, which is life, tech, and career. So she's a data scientist, a speaker, and also a passionate advocate for women in tech. So you may be seeing her more at speaking events like She Bites Back or Calendar Special or many other events which you would unwrap in this podcast. So she's currently a data scientist at Valtech, and also beyond the numbers and algorithms, she's someone who's deeply invested in building communities, sharing knowledge, and helping others navigate the tech world. So welcome to the show, Rhea, and how are you today?
Thank you, Sai. That was really lovely. Yeah, I'm good, thanks. Midweek, always fun because you know you're 2 days into the weekend, so can't
Yeah,
complain.
that's true. So before we start, can you share a bit about your journey and from studying like business information to becoming a data scientist?
Yeah, absolutely. I love talking about this one because it's conventional but not really. So I'll start by introducing myself. Like you said, my name is Rhea. I work as a data scientist at Valtech, which is actually a global consultancy. We focus on multi services like tech, data and AI, which is what I'm part of, marketing, e-commerce, digital strategy and transformation. So as you can tell, we do a lot of services around that. But my main focus is working around the data and AI space and really spearheading that kind of work and quality around it and learn and grow in that space with Valtech. So it's been really nice being able to kind of work with the EU function that I do. So yeah, that's me in a nutshell. But like you said, I am a public speaker. I've been on this journey for a while, and I have so many people to thank for getting me to where I am today. A lot of people for giving me the opportunity. So She Bites Back is one of them. Jess Rush, who initially used to be part of a different hackathon, but now is part of Huddle Hive, is also somebody else that I really give credit to. I'm also a mentor ad hoc. So from time to time, I do mentoring. Outside of it, I love to read. I'm part of a book club. I love sports and I play football. But yeah, that's a bit about me.
A lot of things to unwrap then. That's
Yes,
cool.
there's a lot there. But yes, so my journey really started with my degree. So as you said, I came from a business information systems background. So that really, in a sense, I know they called it that fancy name, but really the degree was in business and computer science. I did that in Anglia Ruskin University in Chelmsford. So I came to the UK in 2017, and that's where I started my undergrad journey. And it's there I really actually found my passion and love for this industry. It's really funny because it was my second year, and I remember it so vividly because it was a tech talk that I watched, which was talking about data visualization and really use stats and visuals to talk about the evolution of storms in different places. And I was like, all I thought there was nothing fancy. And I was like, I just want to be able to do that. I love speaking to people. I love connections, and then being able to add storytell, but like using data as facts is, yeah, what more could you want? So I watched a few things like that, similar things, but honestly, I had no clue where to start. What I'm grateful for was like the right timing of it all, because whilst I was doing this computer science degree, which was also focused on a lot more cloud development, and I would say more developer focused, which was not really my area of interest, but I tried everything I could before I said no when it came to learning. And my passion for business really helped kind of combine the two, and I knew I wanted to go into the analytics space. I actually spoke to my supervisor, who goes by Dr. Yanis. I believe he's doing his own kind of research even now to this day. I actually had a conversation with him first, and he told me right before I went into my summer vacation, end of second year, to kind of look into machine learning and data visualization tools. And it was a completely new space for me. And I'm grateful that he kind of told me how to like look at what I needed to see. Because I went and spent the summer self-teaching myself. Like I was self-learning Python R in this Udemy course that is still up to date with a bit more like courses or modules in it. It's called Machine Learning A to Z. And it's something that you can still find today. And I still use it at reference points sometimes. The entire crux of that course is learning the different machine learning techniques that do exist, little beginner bits of pre-processing the data. And it's very like library focused, but obviously it's a start if you don't know where to begin. And you get to learn it in both Python and R. Back then, I was more R focused than Python focused. I think that was just more because I was in the academic circles and at university. So when it came to third year, I was still doing my degree, but my thesis ended up being actually related to something more data science related. 2020 is where, like, when COVID hit. 6 months
Okay.
before that, I started prepping my topic. It was between the migration, understanding with the data, the migration of refugees during conflicts. And the second one that was proposed by my supervisor was the like predicting an epidemic outbreak. And we went with that because the first one required a lot more sensitive data that we couldn't guarantee we would get. And so I embarked on this journey of going into the data science space where I've self-taught myself, and there was no chat GPT out there. So I purely relied on this course and Google to save my life in terms of coding in R. And I ended up building optimization piece, comparing support vector machines versus KNNs to actually predict an epidemic outbreak. Now, the timing of it all, I understand, is uncanny, but I was actually focusing on the H1N1 influenza. Doing that thesis and really coming out of it, enjoying it, is why I decided to pursue this a lot further. Because one, I got to actually learn a bit more than just storytelling. I understood what algorithms could possibly exist and where to kind of use what. COVID hit. I'm an international student at that time, and COVID was a difficult time in the market. So I decided to do my master's while the world was kind of quiet. And so I ended up doing my master's in the UK. I was still here, and I went to Lancaster University to do a master's in data science. And that was a pretty intense course. I definitely learned a lot more in terms of not just the data mining, but data preparation, data visualization, and then focused a little more on the healthcare industry because we got to specialize in a pathway in the second term and then write your thesis in the third term around it. So that's kind of how that journey went. I ended up applying for a lot of jobs, and the fintech startup that that was my first job. They offered me as a data analyst. And that's really where I got to actually put all this academic knowledge that I had into use, because it's quite overwhelming. When you have that kind of knowledge, but you don't have that necessarily, how do you connect it to the business? Which, if you ask me today, is actually the most important skill that needs to be taught anywhere in universities. Is you could have all this conceptual knowledge and understand the theory of what you're about to apply, but does it make sense for when you actually build this in a business use case? So I think this last 3 years has always been, what is the algorithm best to use? Always keep it simple. Is it going to actually impact what the customer needs at the end of the day? So that's a long-winded answer of where I am today.
That's good. So just to go back a bit, so I understand that you have studied a lot about computer science and then even data storytelling and everything. What actually interested you to go into data science instead of not data engineer or maybe more analytic side? Like, what is the spark there?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think what really sparked for me was that whilst I love storytelling, I don't think when I tried data analyst role, I loved it, but I didn't want to be making dashboards all day. And I'm not saying the data analyst only ends up making dashboards, because I think there's a common misconception about what a data analyst does. And that's really like a part of it, but not the entire bit. But at that time, I was building these kind of dashboards of reporting, and I was trying to improve and optimize. And, a new branch came out called analytics engineering, where you're actually manipulating the data. So to your point, I enjoyed that bit, but I had more fun, or I was more interested, because of the thesis I did and the master's degree I did, in actually seeing what algorithms I could use instead. It was not just the visual piece, but it's like, how would I problem solve? Because data science is all about problem solving. I see that as the bigger umbrella. It combines a lot of things. It combines a certain level of engineering, but needs collaboration with the data engineers. It definitely needs help with the analysts, who really help shape that kind of storyline. But if you don't have an analyst, as a scientist, you should be able to say it. So it was a mix of things. I also didn't want to be, whilst this role is technical, I think it's consistently evolving, especially now more than ever. And it felt a lot easier to transition into this. I was never one to sit back and code and just isolate in a room. Like, I wasn't that person. I loved interaction with people. A part of a data science or a data analyst role is that interaction and being able to gather requirements. So all of those things actually ended up making me realize that data science was the route I wanted to take.
Oh, that's cool. So take me to the path where, like, when you got this data science role, was it something you actually thought that this is what I wanted, or now you have been in this role for what, maybe 2, 3 years now? Why I'm asking this question is that the title data scientist, analyst, or engineer is differs based on each company. It's not
Correct.
a general kind of, there's
Yeah.
no general description for that title because each company has their own definition of it. So
Yes.
that's the reason I'm asking this question is that now we have entered into data science role. So what keeps you more exciting to do the role every day?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you said, I think the role really differs.
Mm,
Frankly, I know a lot of analysts out there that are doing data science roles, and it's kind of blurred. It really just depends on your skill set. You can specialize in a certain area, and that's the beauty of this whole data industry, is that
mm,
you could be an engineer who then decides that they'd rather work with data and finding the best algorithm solutions to be able to solve it end to end. Or I could be sitting and just manipulating the data for somebody else to do the analytics bit. You could be an analyst who's going beyond, like I was interested in, like beyond just creating dashboards and actually play with the data, see what the understanding is, and then be able to tell a story. So now that I'm here, if you're asking me, did I always know I wanted to be a data scientist? Yeah, I think I did. I think that was always the ambition from the start. I was very clear on that since the time I did my thesis in my undergrad. I was like, this is where I want to be, but I wanted to be more business oriented data scientist, to be more clear. I was very much somebody that enjoyed that area of things, which just meant that you were going beyond the technical scope. You were
mm.
also trying to manage expectations from your stakeholders, as well as learn to be adaptable and move into a leadership style eventually down the road. So, yeah.
I never heard of that business data scientist. That might be a new term I learned today.
Yeah. I mean, business data scientists, I don't think they say it a lot, but you will see
Okay.
variations of it. Like they'll say product data science, which is
Mm,
very much like the product function has a different kind of role that exists. And, I always see overlaps. Like data science is always considered as a function that fits within the bigger kind of collaboration of teams. Because data science works with, has to, or can do, work with designers, developers who are building websites as well, and then analyzing that back end of the data once the website's up and running. If
mm.
you're working with data, I would say you're some professional that is already doing analytics and scientist work, and the title is just a bonus, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's true. I think just to add to your point is that I believe any kind of data role it's kind of an opportunity to learn any kind of thing you want within the company. It's like a
Yeah.
cross-functional role. You can sit in any department you like, and you can still bring the same output for them. Can you just give me briefly what you do in your company as a data scientist, like very brief statement, like this is what I solve problems.
Oh yeah. Oh, tough one. I've moved into the generative AI space this last year. So, in the last year or two, to be very honest, I moved from analytics and I've done multiple projects in there to now generative AI space where I'm really working with comparing model reasoning and prompt engineering and RAG modeling. That's kind of some of the day to day stuff that I do. It really just depends because I'm working for a consultancy on the client and the project.
That's exciting. So,
Yeah.
is there any something exciting thing you have already done with respect to this, and you want to maybe give
Oh
more
yeah. I
detail
mean,
that?
I think this last year for me personally has been the best year for growth. And I mean that in
Mm,
like the best way. Like it has changed my life and I could see the growth in my own reflection. So some of the projects I worked on, which I thought were cool, was around, AI driven personalization for website user experience. And that just
mm,
means it's like I was working with testing optimizing RAG modeling, which is retrieval augmented generation for anyone who
mm-hmm,
doesn't know. And that just simply means we're focusing on more like I want to say fancy search or like refined search. Yeah, it's like a sophisticated way of search, essentially. That was one cool project I got to work for in the luxury space. I also worked for another client in the luxury space where that was the longest client I had worked for. And it was really cool because no 2 days were the same. Even today, I can
Mm.
say that I'm never bored. I'm pretty much doing something new almost every other day. And that one, it was more analytics engineering focused and it was more reporting, which I thought was cool. And I got to see beyond the POC, like a proof of concept, where I was actually maintaining these kind of reporting dashboards for the client. And I know the impact it made went up to the C suite level. We're talking about affiliates, and it was all about how the brand is perceived in what markets, what are some factors that do affect if it goes up and down, and there were certain KPIs to measure. And something I'm working on recently, which was really cool, is more around automating the engineering mapping process of data mapping. And I think that's
Mm.
pretty cool because right now we are working on, we finished like a first version of a mapping solution using LLMs, which I thought was very cool. But I'm testing out different reasoning models that could perhaps change the output of what the way we are mapping the solution right now for some of the data that does exist. So I think that's something that's keeping me on my toes, and I'm learning about the different models in OpenAI versus Mistral, versus DeepSeek. So yeah,
Mm.
it's a good time
That's
to be.
exciting.
Yeah, it's a good time to be here now.
That's cool. So where do you see this AI thing going in the next few years in the trend? Like, I know you just started with the project, but
Yeah.
where do you see it's going?
Yeah, I mean, it really depends on what area we're talking about. But
Mm.
in general, I think definitely, as you know, DeepSeek has blown everything out of the water for every LLM model out there. And it all
Yeah.
started with OpenAI. And I thought it was really interesting. And I really hope they like put a memoir or something out there because I would love to
Mm.
read their kind of ups and downs. I think they're in a bit of a
Mm.
fall right now because with their latest model of 4.5, it's quite expensive, quite out of touch for people to use. And they were the first ones who kind of blew this AI space and AI accessibility to people out of the water. So, in terms of trend, I see reasoning models getting better. And I think this
Mm.
is long overdue because we used to use models like RAG or frameworks like React, which is reasoning, act, and thought process
Mhm.
in like the LLM. So this was like the initial stages where we had a React where we would try and reason with the prompt, and then it went into, refining the LLM as is using RAG techniques or summarization techniques via LLM to reason better, plus
Mm.
evaluation, like the observability piece. But now I see reasoning models definitely I see that kind of improving as months go on. So that's a space to watch out for. The other one is, so I think last year it was all about, the different LLM models out there and which of the big
Mm.
techs were putting out their best models. Now we've got so many. I always
Yeah.
tell this to people. I treat it like Apple. Well,
Mhm.
it's ironic that Apple Intelligence might not even be as close as some of the models that Google and
Yeah.
Anthropic and OpenAI put out. I definitely see like the format of what Apple has done. We're going to see a saturation in LLM models and the models we'd like to use because 4.0 does so much on the daily basis. There is no need to
Mm.
go and spend this cost beyond, and it really, really varies on your use case.
Yeah.
But if you know what your use case is and you have the creative freedom to test, please do, just
Mhm.
well within your reason. So, yeah, that's one space. The LLM war in another one. I also think agentic and
Mm.
agents, it's the next buzzword in my
Yeah.
opinion. And that is one interesting thing to watch out for because it's funny because I think this multi-agent thing already existed a year ago. When I
Mm.
started out, colleagues and I were researching and there was already something that existed. But at that point, it was very developer focused. But now we're talking about agentic automation workflow as a whole assistant. So we're now moving different pieces together and then being like, how do we get from A to B using this agentic workflow? So that's
Yeah.
definitely another trend I see having a boom this year.
Mm.
And I think really those are the few ones. Oh, and also I think this is also because I read the book recently, so Chip War, which is a nonfiction book. Interesting to understand the kind of geopolitical war that exists at this stage in
Mm.
time, especially in the AI kind of race that exists. I definitely see this continuing. It already existed before this whole generative AI space, but I would say it's probably got more of a light now more than ever because it's quite relevant to the NVIDIA.
Yeah, yeah. The reason I just smiled is that I was reading that book while before I recording. That's the reason. That's just cool.
Yeah,
I was just in between of the, like I'm in the first 100 pages I just read, so I didn't finish
yeah.
the book, but
It is
I was just reading.
interesting. Pretty heavy, I
Yeah.
will say. It took me a while to get through, so I took some breaks in between.
Like I'm into geopolitics, so I kind of enjoy
Interesting.
that stuff. What do you think about Grok? Have you
I
played with
have heard
Grok?
about Grok.
Yeah.
I haven't personally tested Grok, and this is personal opinion. Any Musk fans out there, please don't come for me. I'm not sure I'm convinced about Grok just yet. I don't see
Okay.
them making enough waves, in my opinion.
Mm.
I'm yet to test it out, so I this is just purely on what I've read. And
Mhm.
it's not looking really good for Musk right now in
Yeah.
general with every other thing that he's trying to invent. So, yeah,
Mm.
it is good to kind of watch out for it. I don't know if it's going to change the kind of leading companies at this stage in time.
That's cool. Yeah. I think I almost have the same opinion, but I've not worked on it.
No, me
But
neither.
so I just have played around how it works and what it does basically. But and the other thing I want to include was that the agents part where I worked on applications. I don't know if this is the only way moving forward, but when I ask people what they want in terms of customers and what they want, it's all about leads generation. That's what they're
Yes.
interested about.
Yeah.
And everyone whom I talk about in the agent space, they're all building models to generate leads out of website or all over
That's
internet.
interesting. I do see that. I do see that. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, is that the only way using agents, or is there another way where you can actually improve the operations within your company, improve the efficiencies, like all the boring stuff you want, let the agents do
Yeah.
it, and all the creative stuff you want, let people do it.
Yeah.
Like that's how I see things. Do you see
I
that?
completely agree. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, see, the thing is, it's an interesting space to be in because I completely agree. I think we should let the kind of monotonous tasks be handled by agents. But that being
Mm-hmm.
said, I will always put that word of caution out there that even though we're building these kind of automation agent flows, there should always be a human in the loop to be able to keep an eye on it. Because again, another myth to bust here is AI, while we're aiming for AGI, I think we're still quite away from achieving it just now. And while agents is a step forward to it, I still don't think that that's the only way. And to your point of lead generations, no, I think there's more than that. Personally, for me, I've seen something more around, processing sensitive data as well, whether that's like your taxes, for example, like you want to put it through a
Mm.
portal and you want it to be able to kind of give you like the auditors that are going through these taxes a lot more like quicker streamlined process, for example.
Mm.
That's where I see the AI agents coming in. So how does that work where they're not sitting and editing individual Excel files that of these tax company tax records, but they're going in and they're like, all right, batch process this for me and then tell me where
Yeah.
I need to have a correction. Obviously through optimization, but
Mm-hmm.
that works too. I also see this on the use case that I did work for that AI personalization website, user experience using RAG. That could be an agent workflow as well. Because
Mm.
you see, it could almost be an agent chatbot. And agentic RAG already is a concept that exists. So I think it
Yeah.
goes beyond leads generation. I do see the potential in it, but I also see cases where, in terms of summarization and classification of like massive documents that you just don't want to have to spend hours reading through,
Mm.
using an agent for that would definitely make a difference.
It's almost like having an internal search engine for the company, like a
Correct.
RAG
And
chatbot.
that's exactly.
Yeah.
I
Mm.
mean, rag on its own last year was the boom. It started with the
Mm.
whole how do we store long contacts so they provide relevant information to now it's like agentic rag and then moving towards how do we better reason the models so we can have a conversational thing. So it's also actually pivoting into more conversational than like robotic chatbots. So that's where I
Mm.
see it moving. So like agentic workflows where it's a little more smoother, but if you're talking about rag, it's how do we get that human conversational experience while speaking to this assistant? That's
Yeah.
that's how I would put it.
That, that's true. So getting into this AI part is where like retail industries and luxury industries, they might not have much to do with ethics part of it. But I
Mm-hmm.
think taxes, lawyers, and when they start using AI, they give a lot of importance to ethical AI.
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you think we can ensure that AI models can be fair, unbiased? What I've seen both parts. So I'm just coming from a book knowledge and kind of coming from applications. What I've seen is that, well, it's okay for certain type of industries, I would say, as of now, but it's not okay for these where hospitals or maybe other industries where I don't know if people would be okay with their data to be analyzed by AI and going somewhere which is not controlled by the companies because they're using third party companies again for that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There are ways to do about this, to be honest. I think The first thing is that there's a lot more AI acts out there now, right? I think getting the legal teams within your companies immediately involved to actually explain how this process goes is probably one of the first things you could do in terms of like ethical AI. Now, this is crazy because, when you're in consultancy, you have to also build pretty quick. So, how's the safest way to build? Well, for one, if you can try and follow the process of, is this in any way going to harm? Is like your first line of action. But then within the LLMs, like for OpenAI, there's a safety filter out there. Use that. Like that's one way of making sure that any kind of bias or harmful content doesn't come through. Biases are inevitable in some way or form. As humans, we will have that kind of bias. But there are ways to mitigate it through evaluation and observability process where we feel like if it's supposed to be if it's supposed to act a certain way and it's not, and it's maybe acting beyond what we think morally or functionally is supposed to work. These observability practices, when we talk about evaluation, and there's third-party tools, like you said, which of course you have to be careful, but there's, LangChain has Langsmith. Langfuse is an open source platform out there. I believe there's also like Ragas and like DeepEval and a bunch of these frameworks. Now, when we talk about the safety of it, I think it definitely comes down to also red teaming, which is a new term that I've been like trying to read a little more about. You should be setting something like that up, especially with your cybersecurity and your legal team, to ensure that kind of ethical aspect to anything that you end up building in terms of AI applications, and try and just kind of also make the client aware or whoever's actually using this, because it's difficult, right? When you're talking about third parties, Azure, when you start building your own kind of environment, you're building that security ecosystem within yourself. And this is talking from personal experience, is why I get to test out some of these reasoning models in the safety of the Azure environment and the workspace that I'm working in. Nobody else can see it. And I think using platforms like that, like Azure, where they've got that AI foundry where you can see those models and you can trust the security, that's where you start thinking about removing the bias, removing the kind of security aspect to when you start using these models in a safe environment. So that's really something to think about. So when you think about third party, reputation definitely matters, obviously. Making sure if there is anything that you think is going to be sensitive, to be redacting and pre-processing that data to avoid that kind of any bias coming through, or any bias like gender, because you don't want that kind of information when you're building this assistant unless it's really needed. And of course, HR might be different. But apart from that, I don't see where gender needs to be involved, for example, or age. And again, varies from use case to use case. But that's where I really see like the ethical standpoint of things. And this is kind of evolving. It's also been really slow, in my opinion, when it comes to like the AI rules and what it looks like in different countries. And it's still a very sensitive topic. And I'm still learning on this. But this is my viewpoint, is there are things you can control. And there are things that you should definitely get the legal team involved, but they should always be the first point of contact. The last thing I would say is if you do want to use something like a co-pilot, have a strategy in place that has some form of governance to the product you're about to roll out, whether that's within your company or elsewhere. And that's some way of making sure you're following an ethical process and making sure everyone's okay with it. You're not forcing anybody to use the product, but at the same time, it's in that kind of safe environment for people to use.
That's good. How do you think that AI can be used? Like now, since you said all these developer tools and things, like all these people mostly work for big companies or have a good budget. Now, let's say small companies, they only look at I don't want to put it very loosely, but bluntly put, they look at internet and news and they get the hype.
Of course.
So there's not much resource available for them, but they still want to get up to the race and catch it up. Now, when you work with these two categories, how do you think in your own way, like which works best in terms of, is it best to hire more resource or is it best to have a person who knows things, what to say, like who has already built these models and then worked for startups? It's like there's a lot of gray area within this.
Of course, yeah.
But yeah.
Fair point, but this I think is very subjective and like it's a personal standpoint of view. It really depends. I've worked for a startup, I've worked for a corporation now, to be very honest, and I'm lucky to say that I've had experience in both, and I definitely think there's pros and cons. To your point about budget, you're absolutely right. Some of the clients that we could talk about may not have the budget, like that is the reality of it. But if that
Mm.
is the case, it comes down to what is the first, like a minimal viable product that you can use without compromising the safety of the development and the quality of the development at the end of the day. And when it comes to ethics, I would personally always say that if the client's saying that they want this kind of thing, warn them, make them
Mm.
aware, because a whole part of this is about the awareness of what exists, and then make sure there's complete transparency if anything does go right or wrong. When it comes to the actual development, when you talk about hiring resources, it really again depends. How much time does this person have? Because if it's just a couple of weeks or even 6 weeks, hiring someone new is a cost, and not just in money, but also in time
Time,
that you
yeah.
will probably not be able to make up with.
Mm.
If you can narrow down what the scope of what you're building is, then getting this one person to sit there and kind of guide, or obviously having within the internal resources do exist, come up with the team that do exist, have one person that perhaps has read a lot more, and you give them that freedom to do quick turnarounds. Especially in startups, that's the kind of adaptability you need, and that's kind of what I learned from startups, which has helped me even today
Mm.
working for projects in Valtech, because there's a lot of clients that will come in as a shorter engagement, and you need to be able to be quick on your feet and be able to kind of turn things around. And you will have limitations, you will have things, but always find alternatives, because there's not one way to do about it. So if you're talking about, is there a perfect way to choose? No, it comes down to the
Mm.
time, the money involved, and the resources available. Best practice, always use the resources available. And if you see as a salesperson that there is a projection for more of these kind of projects to come in within the company or internally, then yes, hiring for the long term is definitely something we should be considering. But
Mm.
you don't have to know it all, especially in the generative AI space. I think it's really common misconception, to be very honest, that you have to know tick all the boxes to be able to start. I think if you know the basics, and I'll just take generative AI for an example, or even data science, if you know the basics, thankfully we have ChatGPT out there, we have Claude out there, we have Perplexity out there. It's not something that we can't do a quick turnaround with. If you know how to code,
Just knowing how to do it.
exactly. If you know how to get from A to B, the resources are still there. So the
Mm.
sky's the limit when it comes to that.
Yeah, that's true. I think that's where I believe the AI is actually bridging the gap of the experience
Yeah.
part, which was actually before given more value. Now it's like, well, you ask the right questions, you get the answers, and
Yeah.
if you have the passion to get it done, you get it done there. I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was thinking about it too, because when I first started working on it, like, yeah, you remember Stack Overflow. I mean, it's still relevant today
Yeah,
as a coder. It is. But let's be real. We have shifted into, ChatGPT Enterprise. Granted that you don't put any sensitive data in or
yeah,
anything that could trace back to your clients or anything. But if you want something quick, the search engine, like Google, is fine. You obviously want to fact check with Google. So please, guys, don't trust everything the AI model
mm,
says out there. But your first point of contact these days, and there's nothing to be ashamed of, is like, okay, but if I wanted to do A to B, what are some ideas you can give me? And then you go and you kind of figure out what you already know, and then start. It's almost like a puzzle. How would you start fitting the pieces together? And whether that's the verticals, which is like, it's wild to see how much of it's now really out there in terms of information. So like you
yeah.
said, bridging the gap between the experience and the adaptability. If we have adaptability, I think anything's possible, and it's a key skill to have as somebody in this industry today.
That's well put answer, I would say. Just before we get to the culture part, what are most exciting projects beyond the corporate space that excites you? Maybe outside in other industries, or you're like, that's pretty cool
Oh,
to see.
you know what? I just briefly had a look at Sora, and
Ah,
Sora was hyped in the US, but now it's in the UK. So I think I'm excited to see where Sora goes and how people in the creative industry use Sora without it hurting the creatives themselves. Because mind you,
mm,
I know there's been a lot of deep fakes out there, and I truly understand where the creative industry is coming from when it comes to tainting the originality of the art.
mm,
But I'd be curious to see, like, something like Sora, where the creative industry goes now with AI space, because it's an interesting time to be. Will it hinder originality? which is a
Mm.
big possibility, by the way? Or will we overcome that over time and then actually see originality retained and using tools to kind of go beyond the realm of possibility when it comes to like entertainment or visual experiences, etc.
Yeah, that's real. I think that's a bit exciting as well as challenging to few
Yes,
people.
it is.
So I think it falls to every field you work with,
Yeah,
irrespective of what industry you work in. But
it's a difficult space.
it's a difficult space. Okay, I think before we go into the rabbit hole of AI, I think there's lots to dig in. So I'll just stop here for now.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
let's come to the next part of this where you do a lot of volunteer or what you call mentorship, you talk in multiple events. So what do you think about building authentic friendships within the work? I think that's something which I've read one of the piece, but I would like you to share here is
Yeah.
that building authentic friendships at work. Why do you think it's important?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny because when I was approached about this, or like I got approved for this talk, really, Amber was like, "Would you be interested?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then, I went into like, "Damn, I guess would people be interested in hearing this?" Because I think it's something we take for granted, and I think that's just
Mm,
me being an extrovert. It came more naturally to me to be able to say hi to somebody. Why I think friendships, and especially like workplace friendships, are good is because it's great when you get along with your colleagues. It's even better when you end up going in probably different directions or different companies and you can still come together and build that friendship because it's all about like the community building. It's all about going beyond just work because I truly, truly believe, and I know there are people in my life at work and outside that kind of guided me. I didn't always think that way. When I first started, I think I was proper in my head about work, and there was a level I needed to reach before I could take a breath. But I don't know if that's like the culture in me, or not that my dad ever told me that I couldn't have fun. He was quite the opposite. He said you have to do both. But in my head, I was thought, work defines me. Everything else is secondary. And then I think the last year really taught me quite the opposite. And that's when I
mm,
really, really, really understood there were two people in my life at work at my previous company that became genuine friends that I hung out with. And we ended up in three different companies this year or like last year. And it's so cool because, we have a life outside. There are things that interest us,
yeah.
but we're also getting to kind of support each other's careers and we're in different fields as well. So it's not like we have to be in the same field. But there's also a selfish aspect to it. When you kind of look at these kind of friendships, there's a time in life where you may need to lean on for support.
Mm,
How do you build that authentic connection where you could go to that person and be like, hey, I kind of need this help, or hey, I'm not feeling so great. I kind of need this support. And it's not always going to be the case that you're going to live near your family or your closest friends that you've grown up with. You need to get out of that comfort zone. It also builds, I love adult friendships because it's tough and you don't always see
mm,
everyone. And it's kind of like this change in life. Some you kind of outgrow, some you don't talk to every day, then you can meet them 5 years later and you're like kind of reconnecting again. So for me personally, how I see it is how do you kind of build that authentic connection that no matter what happens, you know that you could go to this person to talk about something or, support you if there's something that you need and vice versa, because it's not a one-way thing, it's a two-way thing. It's all about transparency. It's all about communication. And to be fair, like, I love seeing my ex-colleagues now friends outside of work because we're catching up and talking about different perspectives. And I think that's really what it comes down to is that I am not sitting and only talking to people that think like me. I'm trying
mm.
to be going outside that boundary, and workplace is exactly where you find that because you are going to find people that you can think on the same level with, but you're going to find people that you may not agree with at the start, but you realize that's a completely different. You're expanding your knowledge without knowing you are. You're expanding your
That's true.
experience and you're expanding your kind of growth mindset when you start
Mm,
building these friendships outside your comfort zone. And that's why I really believe in workplace friendships. So how do you turn those? How do you like convert that kind of colleague? And it's easier when you're in location, by the way, but I also believe you could do it even if you've never met. It's just it depends on the kind of relationship you have at the end of the day. Because I have a few people that I've probably never seen, but at work, I would call them friends. I love talking to them, and we're not on the same project anymore, but it's people I'd love to have a coffee with, take a break with, see
mm.
what's up, check in. That makes a difference. It just also boosts your mood as you go.
Yeah, I think it boosts your morale a bit when you work with
Definitely.
those kind of people. Do you think age matters here? Because let's say in a small company, I'm talking in terms of that,
Yeah, of
where everyone is kind of running their own departments, you can say,
course.
because it's a small company, less
Yeah.
resource and all that.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And you have seen all various age groups there. Now, in that kind of environment, how do you think, like, do you have any practical ways to have this kind of friendship?
I think it depends. Obviously, it's easier to make friends your age. I think that's common,
It's
good
it's
to
a
know
common
kind of
thing,
thing.
yeah.
Yeah, it really comes down to personalities. You see, because
Mm,
it's like, it's also building a personal brand at work, right? I never consider age a barrier, but some
okay.
people could. And it also depends because it is a two-way thing. So it's always easier. Practical advice is like if you can try and build authentic relationships with your colleagues that you start your projects on, that's probably
Mm,
where you want to start. And guaranteed you're not all going to be the same age unless obviously you're working at a startup and you're roughly around the same age range and stuff.
mm,
It starts with understanding what these people like to talk about. Like it'll be topics of discussion, and it doesn't have to be everything, but it could be one topic, and you start gelling on that, and you start work like if it's a sports, obviously easier to be like, hey, there's this game coming. Would you like to come along?
mm.
Kind of thing. But if it's more like topics of discussion, like, hey, I actually read this. Did you? Or what do you think? And, don't force it. Obviously, it's not a debate, but it's
Yeah.
kind of, that's how you would kind of, in my opinion, break the age gap. I
Mm,
try not using that as a barrier because I see them as a person, not an age, and it makes a difference because when you make friends with more experienced people, you unknowingly or knowingly end up learning a lot and be also giving back quite a bit. It's not just them mentoring you, but you're also being able to give back in some way or form because yes, they're experienced, but this is every day is
yeah.
like a new experience in AI example. So if you're working in there, it's not like they'll know everything, right? So it really does depend. So that knowledge sharing, if it's more work related, they'll be like, hey, I found this out. Maybe you knew about it already. If you do, can you give me some tips? If you didn't, here's what I've learned. Would you be interested? And then
Mm,
it starts from there. I think it's also talking beyond work makes a difference. That's really where it starts breaking off because you could be building
yeah.
that authentic relationships. And it makes a difference down the line as well because when you're talking about growing in your career, those are the people that would probably vouch for you as well, or vice versa.
That's true. Yeah. I also think to add to your point is that it's just that sometimes there are times where they are like a mentor. At the same
Mm,
time, you have to understand that when they come for help, it's like
yeah.
a normal person coming and asking you for help.
Yeah.
So it's like you have to balance both the things. Sometimes it's not like you can't call it as a friendship. It's like something. It's
Yeah.
a different relationship there. But yeah, I think I totally relate to that part.
I mean, it really depends, right? Like you said, I guess it's a really interesting question that you brought up because for me personally, I never thought about age, but that could be a case that people do think about age before they ask. I'm just not stupid, but I just don't try and overthink that too much. So I just
Mm,
kind of talk because I'm out of curiosity. I think that's the best way to put it. I talk out of curiosity, and kind of gets translated into having that conversation, but it's not always easy. Like you said, it's always like maybe a one way thing where it's like more of the, how do I say, it's like a one way thing where you're asking the questions and that's the relationship. And that's okay. I think it's a
mm.
personal preference and a personal evaluation of how that relationship's going with
I
the
think,
other.
as you said, it was two-way. It has to
Either way.
depends on the other person. So though you can be a different, but it
Exactly.
depends
It
on.
also depends on the capacity, the kind of relationship you guys have. So, like that kind of connection. Yeah.
That's true. Just on this topic.
Mm.
Do you think culture is a barrier here? Since we are immigrants here, I want to talk about this part.
Mm.
Now I have come to
Actually,
UK, and
very
I
interesting. Yeah.
how do you do that part? Deal with that?
Culture in the workspace, is that like more what you need?
No, it's like let's say like since now I'm an immigrant, I came to a company. The people
Mm.
more I work around is mostly British.
Mhm.
So now how okay, I'm just taking myself as an example, but this cannot be the actual situation, but just like an example I'm taking.
Yeah.
So I've come from a different culture and they're from a different culture, and we just let's say it's my new company now, I've joined it, and now how do you deal, like they want to get closer to me as well as I want to get closer to them, but I don't know how to go, or neither they know how to go because they think I'm a different culture. It's
Right. Yeah,
always
of course. Okay, I see. I see.
this is where I want to go and see.
I think that will always exist, to be very
Mm,
honest. And I would rephrase that. thinking in the head. Like, it's more like there are going to always be cultural differences, but it comes
Mm.
down to, I'm repeating myself here, but a two-way stream. So
Yeah.
there are things that you can learn. I definitely know I'm a culmination of all the people that have been kind and warm to me, and be able to cross that culture barrier and introduce some of the things in their culture and vice versa. Being able to
Mm.
have those conversations of, oh, this is where I'm from, or if they are a British colleague, this is kind of something that we do. Would you like to join us? I think it still depends on the kind of relationship, and it's always going to be difficult at the start. And you have to be patient with the kind of growth that exists, especially workplace, because it's tough, to kind of meet that. But if you are in cities, it's a lot likely that you would end up meeting different cultures. It's a perfect
Mm.
example of it, right?
Yeah.
So many different cultures exist here that it's wild, that it doesn't really feel like British, and oh god, I hope nobody comes for me for that, but it's true. A lot
Yeah.
of the kind of like cities are like that, right? Because everybody is coming to kind of make it in some point of their career,
Mm.
and there's different stages to life, and you're never bored, and the experiences kind of remove that cultural barrier. But that will always exist to an extent, and really just comes down to the people interacting, in my
That's
opinion.
true. Yeah, that's true. I would say, like, me personally, I come to London just to meet people. Like, I have no
Yeah,
work there, so
exactly.
I just go to events every weekend and just go and
And you
meet
just meet, and it's
meet.
beautiful, isn't it? Because you're meeting like people, and they're always just so lovely. I've never met somebody that's actually rude, probably because they're rude to somebody else. But it's London's New York's definitely another one. Singapore's another one.
Mm.
Even in India, if you go to
Yeah.
Bangalore or Mumbai, it's a different world within the country altogether. Like,
Mm.
whilst it's obviously culture focused to a certain area, it's crazy to see the kind of mindset and growth that exists. And I think a part of it also definitely comes, I will say, a part of it actually comes from the corporations that end up making their
Yeah.
business there, like branches
Mm.
or headquarters or anything. Because you're now trying to bring in different people from all kind of cultures into this corporation space. And especially when like the big tech or the big finance companies come in, yes, of course you would hire locally, but you are not
Mm.
restricted in these kind of big cities because you need that kind of economy growth from everywhere.
Have you ever faced imposter syndrome? Because now you're in tech industry and you're learning a lot of things, but
Of
when you come
course.
to implementation part,
Yeah.
it's a different story. How do you deal with imposter syndrome, if I'm okay to ask that?
Ooh, tough one, because I still think I deal with it now. It's never easy, to be very honest. Imposter syndrome is something that I think people live with forever, and anyone who says that they found like way to get rid of it is lying to you. Yeah, I think everyone will have a certain degree of imposter syndrome in them. The way I sometimes deal with it is try and zoom out from the times I feel
Mm.
that. And I just don't mean that in the moment, because it's a lot harder, and it depends on your kind of coping mechanisms when you're doing it. I had such bad imposter syndrome starting out. But what people don't tell you is that it's natural. So I think the problem is that people don't have enough conversations to realize they're not alone, and that they feel like they
Mm.
need to do so much more, prove so much more. I had such a bad imposter syndrome starting out, but early careers, that's so natural, because it's like growing pains. You know how as kids we used to have that? It's the same, but now we're talking about a professional environment added to the mix.
Mm.
And that's where really the imposter syndrome comes, because a lot of us are trying to be authentic, but a lot of us are trying to only portray the successes. When we only do that, we're creating this, I would like to call it an imposter right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that's not the reality. You are going to have those screw ups, you're going to have those failures. And I think what makes you less of an imposter is when you start talking about, this is what I've learned. And it took me so much time to get there. I had to learn it the hard way as well, because I thought I had to portray myself a certain way, I had to act a certain way. And it took time for me to realize, where I'm comparing is somebody that's probably been in my position years ago. And I just need to
Mm.
remember that not everybody's having that same journey. And whatever your journey is, nobody is on that same journey with you. There will be similar journeys. Yes, there'll be similar, maybe ambitions, but everybody has a unique take on where they want to be in life. And I think when it comes to imposter syndrome, zooming out, even if it is practical advice, I always just try to either do something else, like take a walk, go for a run because I'm more active. But if you're not, read a book, watch a show, whatever it is. In that
Yes.
moment, take your mind off it.
Distract yourself, basically.
Distract yourself. But I'm not going to say ignore the problem because distraction's only temporary.
Mm,
Then just kind of sit with yourself, whether that's kind of journaling or that is talking to somebody that you trust. It
mm.
definitely helps put things into perspective because it comes back to you are not going to have the same perspective on this viewpoint. So I think that's some of the ways I deal with imposter syndrome, but also embrace the greats and the lows. That's really how.
Yeah, I think personally, I would say that what helped me was to talk to the person.
Yes.
Like, I think it helps me out. Or some people have said me that they like to write it down. It's
Yes.
almost like you're talking to someone, but you're writing it
Therapeutic.
down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
and how do you balance like this tech career with your personal? Because I see you do both. The reason why I'm asking is that you do volunteer stuff, you do mentorship and everything, and as well as you're working on your career also. So
Yeah.
how do you actually balance both?
I think work-life balance is what everybody wants to achieve. And
Okay.
I'm going to say there are going to be days where it's 70% work
Mm,
and 30% life. And there are going to be days where it's 60% life and
mm,
40% work. It just depends on where you are. For me, how do I do it all? I am a very structured person. Thrive on organization. I thrive on structure, and I know I will never get it all the time. Like it's not something that will happen. So I
mm.
try controlling what's possible for me. So for me, having a routine really helps. I've always had a routine, and I think that's something I did as a teen as well. For example, my relationship with the gym started when I was 14, 15. But it's something that I started in my teens. And
Mm,
I can tell you that I had a love-hate relationship with it at some point because it was not that I was there, it felt like a chore. And when it did, I just stepped out because I was like, there
mm.
are other ways to move my body. But I was also active. I loved playing football, for example.
Yeah.
And then I lost it after university because, I came to a new city and I had to find my footing, like you said, into work. If I'm being honest, the first year and a half of my life in London, and I've been here for like 3 and a bit years now,
Mm,
was very much 80% work, 20% life. This last year is where I
mm,
can really say I've probably got to 60% work, 40% life. And it all came down to routine. I have calendars in like Google Calendar, a physical calendar, and this is just me being over the top. And then I have something that I write down a list of things I want to do at work. So these are things that then help me kind of balance that. When I know I have an event that I'm looking forward to,
mm,
and it took a while, staying active on LinkedIn. I'm a massive advocate for that. Really helps because sometimes you end up realizing there are events that are happening near you and you just have to show up and then it goes from there. So for me, a routine helps. I know there are certain things that I know I'll be doing. For example, there are days that I schedule for running. If I don't do it that day, that's fine. I can move it around. It's not rigid. But for
mm.
example, I know there are things that I know will be set in stone and that helps me plan things around it. So it's being like flexible with what I organize. And that's how I really focus on work and life. But at work, I lean a lot on my colleagues. And while I'm an individual contributor to an extent, I'm also a team player. So my work gets a lot easier when I'm having those conversations or asking for help.
Mm.
So I think that's really how I see leading on the community at work, leading the community in career in general, and then being able to balance that routine for myself. Setting some kind of habit stacking discipline routine is really how I see the work-life balance really happening.
That's I would say myself as semi-organized. I'm not well organized, but I like to do multiple stuff, so I kind of dip my
Same.
hand in all kinds of
Yeah.
things.
It's
So
always a con too, by the way. It's also a
yeah,
con because then you end up being so overwhelmed. You're like you've committed to too many things at once, and it's always learning on that one.
yeah, that's true. What's the one best career advice that you have followed till today? Like it sticks to you even today.
Yeah, it's somebody that I'm really fond of and I really admire at work. And she's a friend of mine now that told me this work does not define you. You
Mm.
define your kind of direction in life, and work is just a part of it. So, yeah.
Wow, that's deep. Okay.
Yeah, I know. When she said it to me, I'm paraphrasing here, but when she said that to me, that was my interpretation of that. And
Mm.
honestly, from when she told me that to now, I can see the change in my mindset subconsciously. Because now that's really stuck in my brain and it really
Oh
makes a
yeah.
difference to how you kind of take life in general.
That's true. I think I need to remember that quite a lot. But that's a deep advice, I would
Yeah.
say. Okay, before we start wrapping up, this last fun bits is that
Yeah.
let's say you want to go out at dinner with a tech leader. Which one do you choose now? With like kind of your inspirations, or whom do you choose? Just have a conversation with them.
Andrew, somebody introduced me to him, and
Deep
I've
learning.
not.
Is he the same guy? No, I think he started his own deep learning.
Yes, that's the one.
Yeah,
That's the one. That's the
okay,
one.
go, okay.
That's the one.
Okay.
One of my mentor, like not even mentors, I shouldn't even call him that. He's really like one of my good colleague friends. He told me about it, and I've been forever grateful. Actually, two people told me about it. Two of my closest colleagues told me about it. Yeah, Andrew and G would be the one.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Yeah, I have lots in my mind. So when someone asks me that question, I'm like, I don't know. That's the best answer I can give.
Yeah,
So
I mean, there's so many people, but I think that's the first one that came to my mind, probably because I mentioned deeplearning.ai today to somebody else. So it helped.
it's a fresh in your mind.
Yeah, exactly.
That's good. And what's a book, podcast, or anything you would recommend? Like, you found really interesting?
A book I would recommend. Does it have to be within the data space or
No,
in general?
it's like vast.
Anything.
Well,
Well, that's a tough one. Books for me is a whole other like conversation. Okay, nonfiction. One for data, I would say, is called Art of Statistics. I really enjoyed reading that book. A historical fiction book that I loved that somebody recommended to me is As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. It had to do with the Syrian war, but it was told in a different limelight, so I thought that was interesting. Podcasts, there's a few, but one I love, which is partly why I'm into investing a lot and partly because of my father who started me young on this. The podcast is called Girls That Invest by Simran Kaur. She also does master classes. I absolutely love it. And no, it's not just for girls or women, but I think it's catered to building that financial independence and encouraging more women or girls to build that financial freedom and wealth for themselves. The other one is actually I think it's called Towards Data Science. It was by Kenji. I used to really listen to a lot of his stuff. Whilst it's a bit longer, I did enjoy some of his data science conversations that he's had.
I think it's called Nearest Neighbors.
That's it. Sorry, I was thinking of the newsletter. Nearest Neighbors. Sorry, Kenji, that's the one. Nearest Neighbors. Exactly. Thank you.
But
yes,
that's cool. Cool then. If there's one thing you want to tell to I couldn't delve deep into this topic, but if there's one thing you would like to tell to women about tech space, because me personally, I'm encouraging my friends, like my friends are mostly, when I'm trying to make them come into tech space, they say, but they have this kind of notion in their mind that, and I'm like, that's not true. How do you encourage them to come into tech space?
To be very honest, I've spoken to so many women and girls, and I understand there is this kind of news, or I don't know, whatever they want to call it, information passing around, thinking that there's high barriers of entry to tech. My advice is no. If you pick a language to learn and you pick an area that you want to do, whether that's visualization, so like data tools, or you want to go into data science and you learn machine learning, or you want to go into the AI space, if you do an intro course for any one of those and you pick a language as your foundation, Python's the more common one, I think just start. Don't overthink it. We tend to do that. I still tend to do that, but don't overthink it. Start small. Set yourself a goal, even if that's 3 months, and kind of track your progress. If it's a Python course, see how you feel. Can you do a small project? Can you write some functions around it? That's how I would. That's my piece of advice to women and girls out there.
That's true. I say to my friends that gender doesn't matter. You can just, I'm learning the same thing as you're learning. So I'm like, there's nothing different there.
I don't know. I know a lot of women say like the environment's a lot more tough because it seems like their male peers are always knowing things. And I personally experienced that myself, and I think that's where the imposter syndrome used to kick in. But I have also seen a lot of cool female leaders in tech, or even within like the senior positions out there, that don't know everything, but they know how to handle it step by step. If they don't know, they'll ask. If they do know, they'll provide. Funnily enough, bringing more women in, I think we're going to build a more collaborative environment going forward. So that's
the one reason why I want, like I was saying to my friends, to bring more women is that I read a book, forgot the name, it's called Unbiased something. It's written by, forgot, I read it way long back.
Is it Invisible Woman?
Yes, that's the book. That's the book.
Caroline Perez.
Yeah, and they've run an experiment where like where they are trained an AI model, but the
Yeah.
data is all generated by men,
Yeah.
and
That
that
could
gave,
angered me.
and that was I was like, that's not what AI we want to
Yeah.
build on. I'm like, you need to bring more people in, especially women
Exactly.
in, so that you get a fair AI that can be used by anyone in the
I
industry.
mean,
But
that
that's
touches
fine.
upon DE&I as well, which, as we know right now, we're apparently taking steps back. So, yeah.
Mm, that's good. Anyway, I think we are way past 1 hour, so
Yeah.
hopefully, I enjoyed a good time, and I think
No,
I
me
would.
too. This is great.
This is great, and I would bring next time just to tell my friends here that we'll talk more about moving in tech next time because it's already more than the time we have actually thought of. But thanks a lot for being on this show, Arya, and I think I
Thank you
enjoyed a
so
lot.
much. Yeah, thank you for having me. I really appreciate you reaching out, and it's very cool that I got to do this with you. I had a great time talking to you, and I think we have lots to talk about.